Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I just want to mention a couple of milestones. Joe DiMaggio hitting 56 straight games. Lou Gehrig played in 2,130 straight games. And Laura Hogel, are you still here? She's gone, but I want to just mention Laura Hogel has been nonstop as far back as I can remember, every single seminar. Okay. It doesn't matter what the seminar is. Laura's there. So I was going to congratulate her on that, but she cut it out. Anyway, Nelson Campbell, Plant Pure Communities, is launched the Plant Pure business after releasing the hit documentary Plant Pure Nation in 2015. The film was released in theaters in over 100 communities, then went on to Netflix and today plays on Amazon Prime and Apple TV. Nelson wrote and directed the recently released award-winning film From Food to Freedom, which highlights the healing power of a plant-based diet. Nelson, we're looking forward to what you have to say.
Okay, thank you very much. It's good to be here. I heard you had to fight through a big accident on 95 to get here. Is that right? That's what I heard. But anyways, it's great to be here, and I really enjoyed the discussion there at the end about renewable technology. And there is a connection of that to what I'm going to talk about here today. As was just mentioned, I'm a filmmaker, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've done some other things. I started a nonprofit organization, so I've done some work in that field. But it's all around the idea of promoting the health and the environmental benefits of a plant-based diet. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about here today. Now, when I first got this call to come by the International Yacht Brokers Association, quite honestly, I thought at first that, was this for real? Because I've never had the pleasure of speaking to an industry group like this. But when I talked to Paul, I got very excited about the opportunity of coming here. And I thought about, because I always like to, speak in a way that connects with my audience. So I thought about what is the connection between what I do and what you all are interested in, and what I would be interested in too if I had a little more money, because it looks like a lot of fun. But what is the commonalities? It turns out there's a profoundly important and deep connection between those of you who like to do this sort of thing and what I'm going to talk about here today. And so I hope you'll bear with me on this. I don't know how many of you in here, if any, are plant-based or curious about a plant-based diet. How many of you fall in that category? So, well, that's more than I thought there would be. Actually, my favorite audiences to speak to are people who are new to this, and even people who are skeptical about this idea. In fact, I'd much rather talk to an audience like that than people who are in our community, actually. So the first thing that I want to say, I'm going to give you a little background, and I'm going to kind of tell you a story. This is going to maybe tell you a series of stories, because I am a filmmaker, and I like to tell stories. I like to communicate through story. In fact, my wife, Kim, is always getting after me because she says, why don't you just get to the point? You always have to build up to it and make it into a story. And she came with me here today, by the way. That's my wife, Kim, here in the front. And she's been with me on this journey since the beginning. And in fact, we first met when we were 16. So we've known each other for a long time. But anyways, when I was a kid growing up, I was the opposite of plant-based. I spent most of my growing-up years in the country, and I fished all the time. I always had a fishing pole in my hand. I camped and backpacked. I rode horses, and if I wasn't doing those things, sometimes I played basketball, but if I wasn't doing those things, my dad had me outside doing some sort of chore, building a fence or building a barn or cleaning out the barn, so that sort of thing. And in fact, my goal in life as a kid was to grow up and be a cattle rancher. I wanted to go out west because I figured I could ride my horse and I could sleep under the stars and do all the stuff I like to do, and I loved eating meat. We did have some vegetables. My mom was pretty good about making sure we had veggies, but it was always as a side. And there were 5 kids in the family, and I was the oldest. But typically, we would always fight over the last one of these, whether it be a hamburger or a hot dog or the last piece of meatloaf. I love meatloaf. My mom's from West Virginia, and she made this delicious, juicy meatloaf that was absolutely fantastic. But that's how I grew up, just like everyone else for the most part. But I changed. I changed my thinking around this because of this man here. That's my father, Dr. T. Colin Campbell. And he is known and revered by millions of people around the world today because he is the science father of the plant-based movement. He's the guy who really discovered the science and the health benefits of a plant-based diet. Now, let me tell you his story. So he grew up on a dairy farm. His father was an immigrant from Ireland. He was Scotch-Irish. And he came over here on a boat. He came through Ellis Island. In fact, I've seen the ledger where they recorded his name. And he came over here and he scraped together some money after working, I think, as a chauffeur for a while. And he bought a small dairy farm. And my dad spent most of his growing-up years on that dairy farm in Virginia. And he's got a lot of stories. I think in many ways that was one of the most memorable parts of his life. He was a farmer. He still is a farmer in his heart. But he went on to college, and he went to Penn State. And he was such a smart guy that his professor at Penn State called this famous professor at Cornell and said, "Hey, you got to recruit this guy. He's brilliant, and you got to get him into your graduate program." So my dad ended up at Cornell University in a PhD program. And as a farm boy would, his thought was to write his interest was writing a thesis about how to grow animals more efficiently for food production. So that was his bias. But the one thing about my dad is he's got enormous integrity, and he was able to let go of that bias to see the reality in front of him. And all he cared about was the truth, just following the truth wherever it led. And so at that time we were at Virginia Tech, and he started doing some research and looking at finding other research that suggested that, there might be some effects of animal protein that aren't what people think. The animal protein might not be the holy grail nutrient that we always thought. And so he started doing lots and lots of research. He had some health issues in the family that were motivational to him, like my mom's mom, who died a painful death from colon cancer. When she first came in, they knew that she had colon cancer, but they wouldn't take her because her family was so poor and she had no health insurance. So they sent her back home with X-Lax. And she came in months later at the end stage with the most painful symptoms. But my dad watched that whole thing, and it impacted my mom, of course, and my dad, and really motivated him to explore this cancer diet connection further. And so he ended up doing hundreds of studies looking at different mechanisms of action and how they might relate to the consumption of animal protein and cancer. And it all culminated in a famous study that he did where he was able to, in the laboratory, he was able to turn the cancer process on and off like a light switch by toggling between plant and animal protein. And I remember when he came home that night, because he had gotten this data, he'd looked it over, he'd confirmed it, And he was so excited. And, you know, we always sat around a big dinner table and had dinner together. We were still eating our meatloaf at that time. And he came home and he said, you know what? I have figured out how I can turn cancer on and off through food. And it was from that moment on, as a family, that we started to gradually shift our diet away from animal products. And so he started to gain a lot of fame around this time. And then in the 1980s, he had an opportunity to do what is still today the most comprehensive study ever done of diet and disease. And he did this in rural China. And I won't go into all the details of this because it'd take too long, but I'll just say that at that time, rural China was a perfect living laboratory to look at the connection of food to disease. And what he found, it was very clear, what he found is that the closer a population gets to a plant-based diet, the lower the incidence of all the chronic diseases. Because there is no such thing, by the way, as separate diseases. We have sort of separate endpoints, but it's all part of the same chronic degenerative process. It's like, you know, imagine the trunk of a tree. We all have our genetic predisposition to get something, except once in a while someone comes into the world with a perfect set of genes, and they do everything wrong and they live to be 100, and we all hear those stories. But for the most part, most of us have our genetic predisposition for something. Well, if you're eating the wrong food and you're not giving the body what it needs, it starts to break down. And the way it breaks down is like you're going up the trunk, and which limb that you go down depends on your genes. So someone might get type 2 diabetes, someone else might get colon cancer, someone else might get Alzheimer's, whatever that is. And so that's what he found in China, is the closer we get to a plant-based diet, the lower the incidence of all these diseases. He tried to bring this message to the public through Washington. He went to Washington, he testified in front of congressional committees, he worked at the FDA, he consulted with the NIH and all these different government agencies to try to bring this truth to the people. And he really got fed up. He said every time he walked into a room, he could see the industry sitting at the table. So quite frankly, he was getting pretty depressed. So we all told him, why don't you just write a book? Take this to the people. Take this information to the people. So he, with the help of my brother Tom, wrote this book called The China Study. And at first, he couldn't get anyone to pick it up, any publisher to pick it up. But finally, he got a little publisher to pick it up. And within months, it was an international bestseller. And that's what launched the plant-based movement. So that's his story. So my background is as an entrepreneur, and I won't go into everything I did, but I'll just say about 15 years ago, I decided to commit myself to helping my dad get this health message out deeper into the mainstream. You know, I'm one of those people who think when you live, you need to live with purpose. You need to do something meaningful. Something that makes a positive contribution. And I thought I could do that by helping to share this message. And as I mentioned, my wife, Kim, has been with me along the way, and I'll tell a little bit more about her story in a minute, but she was part of this here too. So the first thing that we did, I had a long-term vision, but the first thing that we did was we had figured out that the best way to introduce people to this idea was to put them on the diet for 10 days. Educate them, but give them the food for 10 days, and then provide pre- and post-biometric testing, mainly cholesterol testing, but also blood pressure and sometimes glucose, so that people could see quantitatively what was happening. So we did that, and we created the meal plan, we rented a kitchen, and we did our first immersion in the town of Wake Forest, north of Raleigh. So we live in North Carolina. Small town of Wake Forest, and I had a friend up there who had some friends who thought she could recruit into this immersion. So we did it, and we were blown away. We ourselves had no idea that we'd see That magnitude of change in 10 days, cholesterol dropping, various disease conditions going away. I would say in all the immersions we've done, over 80% of the people who are medicated when they come in have the option to substantially reduce and oftentimes eliminate the medications by the end of the 10 days. So it was incredible. In fact, I called up my dad and I shared the data. He himself couldn't believe what we were seeing. So we did that one, and we did some more in the area, and we kept getting the same results. And so at this point, we decided, let's scale this up. And so I had this crazy idea that we were going to launch a big campaign in the city of Durham to scale up this idea. But we were having a lot of challenges. We had capital, we didn't have the capital to do this. And there were other challenges that we were having. And quite frankly, I had big dreams, but we also were on the verge of giving up. And then this happened. So another interesting story. My dad was invited by the Kentucky House of Representatives to come give a speech about the health benefits of a plant-based diet. So he spoke from the floor of the House. Kentucky has a very high rate of chronic disease, or one of the unhealthiest states in the country. So he went to speak from the House, and at the end, he got a standing ovation. He couldn't believe it. He had never gotten that reception in a government setting ever. So he called me up, and I started thinking, and I said, would you let me can I talk to the legislator who invited you? So he made the connection. We started talking, and we dreamt up this legislation for Kentucky where we would do an immersion in a poor community in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, up in coal country, and we would fund it. And I wasn't quite sure how we were going to fund it, but I figured if we had that opportunity, we could convince someone to help us. So we would fund it. All we wanted the state of Kentucky to do was to say at the end of this, we'll sit down and we'll look at your data, and if you do what you say you can do, we'll talk to you about a strategy for rolling this out across Kentucky, starting in the poorest communities first. And so that was pretty exciting. Who could be opposed to that idea? So it went into committee, and my friend Tom said it engendered the most intense lobby effort he's ever seen in 30 years of politics. The industry killed the bill. It never got out of committee. So at this point now, I'm really demoralized because I was having a hard time going into this, and I thought this might be our salvation to get this project, and so now I'm really kind of feeling demoralized. But then I started thinking, I'm always trying to figure out how to turn a negative into a positive. I started thinking, you know what? This is just an example of how this message has been suppressed for now decades by powerful interests. So what if I could drive a storyline here and film it and make a movie? And it was a crazy idea because I'd never made a movie at that time. But I decided to do that, and I went and got some friends who'd made this movie Forks Over Knives, which was a pioneering film, and they taught me the ropes of how you make a movie. How you write the storyline and how you do the filming and all the elements of making a movie. And so I ended up making this movie that starts with the story in Kentucky. I tell that story. Then I go back to North Carolina, and I say, basically, you know what? They wouldn't let us do that project, but we'll do that back here in North Carolina. And we're not going to go to some college town to do this. We're going to go to the rural South, actually where we live, because we lived in a small town there. And we're going to do it there, where people, especially at that time, had no knowledge of a plant-based diet. So I scraped together a group of people from a town called Mebane. I literally went up and down the sidewalk, kind of pleading with people to do this. And I can't remember now, maybe 15 or so people. And that's what this is here. And we did the 10 days. They got spectacular results, just like the other immersions that we had done. And in fact, they went out and they started talking about it in the community. So we decided we'll do a second one. So we did a second one, which was bigger than the first one. And we did a third one. This here is in a black church north of town. We did one with those folks. And that was a really meaningful results as well. Then we did, finally, we got up to 5. This was our 5th. And by this point, we had 130 people, and we had more people wanting to do it, but we had to turn them away because we couldn't make enough food for people. So we showed how this idea could go viral. I kept all the data, blinded, kept all the data, the aggregate data, and then I decided I'm going to take this back to Kentucky. This is what we wanted to do in the legislation, so I basically did it anyways, but I did it even bigger. So I got all that data, went back to Kentucky, and by the way, this was a paper that was done by the University of Cincinnati looking at the data that we got. So this is a third party that analyzed our data, and you can't see it from back there, but on average, total cholesterol went down by about 25%. Same thing with LDL cholesterol, about 25%. In 10 days. In 10 days. This is so much more powerful than statins. In fact, people who are on statins who do this, their blood pressure goes down even further. And again, most people who were medicated had the option to reduce or eliminate those medications by the end of the program. So this is kind of third-party validation. But we took this back to Kentucky, and we engineered a showdown with the legislature. And it was a complicated process, more complicated than I could even show on film. But the whole idea was to demonstrate through a real story how powerful forces have suppressed this health message for decades. And so if you haven't seen Plant Pure Nation, I encourage you to do it. It came out in theaters in over 100 communities in 2015, and then it went on Netflix, and now it's on Amazon Prime. But I've got the trailer here. I'll play quickly.
What's your healthiest meal?
What?
Do you have any health meals? Anything that's fresh?
No, we don't.
The culture in America is that everything revolves around food and unhealthy food.
The healthcare cost trajectory is out of control because the consumers are not in charge.
This is clearly an unsustainable trend.
We're not telling people how to use food.
Red meat,
Beef.
green beans with bacon and butter.
When we talk about this idea of plant-based nutrition, it's a powerful concept, and it's one that my father is associated with.
Dr. Colin Campbell, Doc. Whole foods, plant-based diet.
Right.
You don't mean the store.
You know,
I went on essentially a plant-based diet. No dairy, no meat.
Type 2 diabetes, heart disease, hypertension. Gone.
Physicians don't know how to prescribe a diet. We've been taught how to write prescriptions.
Right now, this information isn't available to them. So how can they make a decision?
We're working our way into the political process here.
The absence of meat as part of your diet is not the best direction for all Kentuckians.
You got to realize that there's a lot of big money interest.
But the amendment itself is flat out true.
We're trying to demonstrate this concept in this community.
We offered 10 days of food.
I've been testing for 26 years, and I've never seen results like this.
Mr. Speaker, I call for a vote.
The folks that are challenging this, they represent big business.
Well, the truth is a stubborn thing, and it doesn't go away.
The documentary Plant Pure Nation explores scientific evidence.
In any movement, the first step is always the hardest.
Your total cholesterol is 150.
Is that accurate?
Yep.
When people learn about this, the very next question they ask, why haven't I heard this before? Why? Because revolutions can't start without awareness.
Back when I started in this, there were 3 farmers markets. Now there's about 26.
The amount of money that we spend to create the kind of health situation we have, it's not working.
This is going to be a lifestyle.
Our thesis is that we've got to change this world from the bottom up. Okay, so that came out in 2015. On the heels of that, and one of the reasons I wanted to do the film was to create a platform that we could stand on to launch this larger strategy I had in mind. On the heels of that, we started 2 organizations. One is this Plant Pure Foods business, kind of foods and education. And we eventually ended up selling products in the retail channel. And by the way, this is where Kim was a central part of this. She is a chef and a cookbook author, and she also has published these 3 cookbooks, so she's quite well known in the plant-based field, and she's been the mastermind behind everything that we've done in terms of recipes and products. We also launched a nonprofit organization, so we ended up launching a network of grassroots support and advocacy groups around this idea. Hundreds of thousands of people participated in that. And more recently, we handed that network off to another organization so that we could focus on a more media-driven strategy, which I won't go into here, but that was a big accomplishment of our nonprofit. And everything that we are doing is to try to create an alternative to this, which is drugs, the pharmaceutical model. And I'm not going to say that there's never a place for drugs. You know, I oftentimes say if I get into a car wreck, I don't want to get into a car wreck in any country other than here, because I think we've got some pretty good technologies to handle problems like that. But unfortunately, over 80% of the problems that we have are the result of chronic degenerative diseases. And drugs don't really help all that much with that, except maybe to soften the symptoms. Those are foodborne illnesses. And in fact, that model is really based on what I refer to as the prevailing medical knowledge. And I see the right hand of my slide is getting lost over there. But this is how we think of medicine in this country. And this was a paper that was published in a well-known journal. And it basically says in the healthcare sector, innovations are the source of any improvement in the quality of services and quality of life. Progress in medicine requires new technologies. So it's always about technology. It's always about usually drugs, but sometimes surgical procedures and other diagnostic tools. And it's all dressed up as knowledge, you know, that we have this incredibly deep and important knowledge. But to some degree, it's an illusion. And I really like this quote here from the famous physicist Stephen Hawking. The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. It's the people who pretend to have the knowledge, who oftentimes influence and control the rest of us. And, you know, whenever I think about this idea, I think about this old movie that I know you all have seen, The Wizard of Oz. You know, the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and Dorothy, they traipse all over the place. They end up in there. They want to go see this famous Oz guy in I guess, the city of Oz. And they walk into this big hallway, this big chamber, and there's smoke and fire and his booming voice. When it turns out it's just this little guy behind who's pulling the levers. So that's kind of a lot. When I think of our healthcare system, you know, this image kind of comes to mind of, you know, people who are projecting all this knowledge and all this technology, but it's really the illusion. Much of it is an illusion. And I say that because of the failure of our healthcare system, which is well documented. So if you look at this graph here, if you can't read it from the back, around 1940 or so, 7.5% of the American population had chronic disease. Today we're up, that was 2020, today we're up to about 2/3. 2/3 of us have some sort of chronic condition. I mean, can you imagine going from 7.5% to 2/3? So something's not working. And it really became apparent during the pandemic. So this is a story that maybe you haven't heard before, and it's the subject of another film I made, which I'll get to in a minute. But the COVID pandemic hit, and it hit hard first in Italy, if you remember. And there was a big wave of illness and deaths, and so the Italian government commissioned a study. And they looked at the folks who were dying of COVID. And they found that over 99% had one or more pre-existing conditions, which were diseases mostly like type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, these kinds of conditions. These were the people who were dying of COVID, over 99%. And even in our country, the CDC did a study later, and they found something similar. They found that of all of these they looked at 4.9 million hospitalized patients. Of 4.9 million, about 95% had at least one underlying medical condition. Top of the list, high blood pressure, hypertension, disorders of lipid metabolism, high cholesterol, obesity. A big risk factor for death is diabetes. So this is what they found, is that those of us who, the unfortunate situations where people died, most of the time it was folks who had poor health or, and an underlying chronic condition. And again, these are foodborne illnesses. These are foodborne illnesses. And we saw that in 10 days, when people start eating the right foods, everything changes. So during the pandemic, the best thing that you could have done was to eat a healthy diet. But how many times did we hear that? I never heard that. No one talked about this. They're always talking about solutions that others could provide to us, but not what we could do for ourselves. This is something we can do for ourselves. And maybe that's why we didn't hear about it, because there's no money in that. And so at this point, I'm getting really frustrated. And prior to the pandemic, we had continued doing immersion programs. And I like to go to offbeat places to do these programs. I don't go to college towns. I like to go to places where you would think that people wouldn't be interested in this, because I've never bought into that. Early in my career, people said, if you want to communicate this idea, you have to go to what I call the Whole Foods demographic, people who shop at the Whole Foods market. I've never believed that. I love Whole Foods market, by the way, but people are people are people. We're all the same, and it's a matter of communication. So, like for example, we did an immersion program in a community in southwest Louisiana, a Cajun community, a mobile home community on the edge of a swamp, and many of the people there were eating out of the swamp. We had great success. We did a program in northern Indiana, a mostly Amish community. Again, great success. And then we did a whole bunch of immersions up in the Dominican immigrant neighborhoods of New York City, working with a partner called Somos. So we had great success there too. So we had been doing this, and I knew what happens when you eat the right foods, and I was getting frustrated with the messaging during the pandemic, and so I decided to do something that I'd always wanted to do, which is a live-in immersion, where we could ensure 100% compliance with the diet. Because when you do a regular immersion, even if you give people the food, you don't know what they're doing when they go home, right? They might fall off the wagon, they might sneak in some Twinkies or whatever, you don't know what they're doing. So we went out and we recruited 6 people with type 2 diabetes, all advanced stage. They were all taking insulin. So they were headed to a very dark place. Do you guys hear some bells? There's something ringing up here. Anyways, they were headed to a very dark place. And so we put them in this house with a physician. And we had 2 chefs, including Kim. She was kind of the lead chef. And we fed them a pure diet, a plant-based diet, for 10 days. And we had to have the physician there because when people with type 2 diabetes go on this diet, they start to heal so fast. Their body starts producing so much insulin that if you don't kick back the insulin that they're taking, they can go into what's called hypoglycemic shock, which can be deadly. So your body starts healing so fast that the insulin medications become toxic. So we had to monitor these people. They were monitored 24/7. She could look on her smartphone and she'd see their glucose numbers. So this was all data-driven. There was nothing that was done here to make a movie. But we filmed it all. And we showed that within 10 days, even in advanced cases, people can completely heal of their diabetes in 10 days. It was amazing, amazing. And as we go through this, we talk about the pandemic. Because you see, those people with type 2 diabetes, they were highly vulnerable to the COVID virus, but they didn't know this. And so we talk about the pandemic, we talk about our over-reliance on the pharma paradigm. And I did something interesting toward the end of the program. I sat them all down, and they didn't know what was coming, and I played the Trulicity commercial, which many of them were on coming into the program. And I said, what do you think? Share your feelings. And it was the most damning indictment of our over-reliance on the pharma model of anything I've ever seen. I didn't have to say anything. They said it all. And so we ended up making this film. We did a little sneak peek release just over a year ago, this past spring. Over 100,000 people signed up to watch the film, and they watched the film in 7 days. We did a little 7-day sneak peek release. And then it went into film festivals around the world and ended up winning 10 awards from LA to London and Paris and Florence and Germany, different places. And I mention that because then we went to release it this past summer. And there's nothing conspiracy theorish about this film. It's all based on sound science. There's nothing, we don't get into vaccines, we don't get into all the things that seem to upset people. We just talked about food and immunity. And we ran into these guys. Oh, before I tell you that, let me play the trailer real quick.
The research is alarming. More than 500,000 of our children will have diabetes by the year 2060.
On the market since 2017, the FDA-approved drug for managing type 2 diabetes is soaring to newfound fame.
We're ignoring the thing that really matters. It's extremely important that we finally get to know what we have not known.
Hey.
Thank you for coming here. It's a big commitment.
This is a continuous glucose monitor that you've now applied to the back of your upper arm.
We're taking people who are eating the standard American diet and we're feeding them foods that kind of feel a little familiar to them.
I would like to feel better, I'd like to feel happier, and I want her to be proud of me.
Rome wasn't built in a day.
First thing they said, they make it feel like your insulin's going to take care of things, and they just keep increasing your doses.
And because of the cost of insulin, there were times that I went to a food pantry.
The burden of chronic disease, it can be quite severe.
I don't have time to get sick because I'm trying to take care of everybody else.
So your lab results show.
Wow. Wow.
Our time is a time that is ripe for revolution.
The sad thing is, a lot of people, we don't know we're in bondage.
Freedom is being free of the pharmaceutical companies controlling my life.
And when you make that decision, you gain freedom. So that came. So we got ready to release the film, a big public release last summer, and we ran into these guys. And then subsequent to that, YouTube and Google. Facebook ended up censoring our promotions of our film, and we complained. We spoke to someone inside Facebook, and they ran it up the flagpole to senior management, and they came back and she said to us, no, this is our policy. She wouldn't tell us why, but we are not going to allow you to promote this film and basically go away. Further appeals will do you no good. Now, most of you may not know this, but Facebook's biggest source of ad revenue is pharma ads. So that's why we got censored. And Google and YouTube have done the same thing. You can find it on YouTube. So if you want to watch the film, you can find it on YouTube. But it was taken off like a rocket, the views, and then it just, within the span of a few hours, it completely got choked off, and the view count stopped. And that's because they pointed their algorithms such that, they weren't sharing it anymore. So you can find it, but you have to put the words "from food to freedom" in there. So this is a message that powerful interests don't like, but it's a vitally important message for reasons of health, but also economics. And I'll kind of move through this a little quicker. But back in 1970, total healthcare expenditures was 7% of our GDP. Today, we're approaching 20%. That imposes a huge cost burden on employers. It makes it hard for us to compete when employers have to deal. That's a huge cost for employers. But also for government. It's the single biggest item in our budget, Medicare and Medicaid. And of course, that just feeds our national debt, which is going to be approaching $50 trillion by 2030, which then imposes a huge interest cost. This is showing exploding interest payments that our federal government's having to make. And, the question I have is what happens at a certain point when people lose confidence in the financial system of the U.S., when people start seeing U.S. bonds as junk bonds. And my background is actually economics, and when that happens, that's a pretty scary thing. And so there are real economic costs to this. There's also environmental costs as well. So this is where there's another connection to what you were talking about when I came in here. Over the course of human history, we have degraded and destroyed many natural areas. We've polluted our waters, and we have an issue with emissions, carbon, CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. And all of that contributes to climate change, of course. And there's a very strong connection here with our food choices. Now, the one thing I want to say is we are making rapid progress with technology. We need technology in this case here. And so some of the technologies that you were talking about when I came in here, I was really pleased to hear that was a topic here at this event. And we are making rapid progress. But if that's all we do is focus on technology, we're fighting this with one hand tied behind our back. Because there's a lot of warming in the pipeline already baked in. And we have feedback loops that are accelerating. And so just, reducing emissions is not going to be enough for us. Plus, we have the reality of economics. You can't just wave a wand and take an economy off fossil fuels. Because if you do that, you're going to kill your economy. You're going to choke off your economy. And there's nothing worse for the environment, ironically, than an economy that's collapsing. Because when an economy collapses, the last thing people care about is the environment. Plus, you don't have the wealth to solve the problem. So you can't just wave a wand and make fossil fuels go away. They're going to be with us for a while. That's just the reality. But fortunately, there's a very important overlooked fact here that gives us another pathway to expand our solution. Since people came on the scene and started practicing agriculture about 12,000 years ago, we have cut down about half of the world's forests. And that has been mostly for agriculture. And of course, most of that has happened in the past few hundred years. And of that agricultural land use, 80% of it has been for the production of animal-based foods. The animal agriculture industry is very inefficient. It takes a lot to feed and grow a cow. And we've cut down a lot of our forests to do that, which has released enormous amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. But we've also lost a very important mechanism for sequestering carbon into biomass in the soils. But that fact actually, as I said, opens up another pathway for us. And it's because of this very important principle here, which is that nature is the same, whether you're talking about individual biology or ecology, the whole system. Nature has baked into it a powerful self-healing mechanism. just like we saw in our immersions, but the same is true with our entire ecology. And so about 3 years ago, through our nonprofit, we funded this guy here. He's a famous climate researcher, to do a study looking at the contributions of animal and plant agriculture to greenhouse gas emissions. And he did this study here, which is now the most widely cited study on this topic, but he found that animal-based agriculture emits far more greenhouse gases than does plant-based agriculture. But that was just the first in a series of studies that we're envisioning. We're trying to get some support to do this. We have a, gosh, you can't see it here. We have a rather bold research vision, which is a strategy for looking at a natural regenerative approach for pulling carbon out of the atmosphere over 20 years. It involves reforestation and other kinds of natural regeneration, which is made possible by shifting to a plant-based diet. So the assumption is if we shifted to a plant-based diet, how much of this land could we reforest? How much would naturally regenerate? How much would regenerate on marginal lands with some prompting? And there are other issues that he wants to look at around palm oil production, rice farming, and marine-based solutions that all sum to a total solution for solving climate change and also addressing other aspects of our environment. And he's already done some rough calculations, and he believes that this research will show that through a natural regenerative approach made possible through a shift in our global diet, that we could not only slow climate change, but actually reverse it. Because believe it or not, if you look at the pattern over the eons, we should be in a cooling trend right now. And that's also going to have other benefits, a cleaner water and restoring our oceans. Because as the ocean temperatures go up, all kinds of bad things happen in our oceans. And preserving our ecosystems and species that live on this planet with us. And this is an urgent idea, this connection of our food choices to the environment. Because right now there are, and I heard you guys talking about Bill Gates, so I'm not going to say anything insulting about him when you were talking about him in the last session, but I mean, I guess he's done some good things. I don't know a lot about him actually, but he is kind of leading the charge to do something that I think could be disastrous for our climate, for our environment. He wants to shoot aerosols into the atmosphere to block sunlight. And he's already trying to organize research to test this idea. And there are a lot of other technologists who are thinking the same thing, and they've also rallied support within the government. So I said this was coming 10 years ago, and in fact it is coming. And so we all need to be aware of this, that this is what they want to do, is they want to shoot aerosols into our atmosphere. That's going to have all kinds of problems. It's kind of like the drug approach all over again, but it's chemotherapy for our whole planet. And I won't, go into all of this, but just a couple points. We would lose the blue in our skies if they do this. So if you're out in your boat and you're sailing around, you're looking up at the sky, it's going to look a lot more hazy and whitish gray. We're going to lose that beautiful blue. It's going to change the weather patterns. It's going to have all kinds of unintended ecological and agricultural impacts. And it could cause global conflict because there are going to be winners and losers. And then, if a terrorist takes out the mechanisms that are used to shoot the stuff into the atmosphere, then you have something called termination shock, which, could, all of a sudden you lose that, and that sudden shift would cause all kinds of catastrophic problems. So this is just a silly idea, and it's another kind of government top-down solution to fixing a complex problem. And I'm kind of tired of that. In fact, I kind of like what this guy here said, Mark Twain. He said, politicians and diapers must be changed often and for the same reason. I don't think top-down solutions, whether it's for our health or the environment, I think we need to take a different approach. We need to be thinking more about bottom-up change. How can we engage people? How can we engage communities to make change? Whether it's, economics or the environment or health, I really think that we need to be thinking about how to engage people and transformational change. But before we do that, now I'm going to kind of bring it back to how this connects with what you all have a passion for here. We have to change the way we see. We have to change the way we see the world so that we can all get on the same page with the problems and the solution, the right solutions. But we're never going to get on the same page if we don't see reality, if we're only seeing what we want to see. And we all do this to some degree. We look out at the world and we just stare. We look at that tree in front of us. That's all we care about. We see that tree in front of us. And we miss the forest. We miss all the complexity that's all around us and all the interconnections. And the reason that's so dangerous is because when you just stare at the tree in front of you and you ignore all of that complexity around it, now you can start pursuing, you can develop and pursue ideas for your own selfish interests that are at odds with the health of the whole. So this is the pharmaceutical approach. You know, you have this complex system, complex biology, but you're just fixated on one chemical because you can patent that chemical and you can sell it to people and you can make a lot of money. Okay, so this is what gives rise to technology, is this way of thinking, and some of that's good. You know, the development of technology requires a kind of reductionist focus at times. But when that's the only way we see, we run into problems. Now let me get back to this. So I have a sense when we go to the beach a lot. And a lot of times we just sit at the beach and I'll look out across the water and I just have this feeling, and I know you feel it when you're out there on the ocean too, if you're out there on your boat. I know you feel this. You look up at the sky, you feel the breeze on your face, you see that immense body of water, and you know on the other side maybe is Europe or Africa or some other place. You look at the clouds in the sky, and you just get the sense that, you know, we're a small part of this incredibly, almost incomprehensibly large whole, W-H-O-L-E. And it's beautiful. The complexity is beautiful. And we're part of it. We don't live apart from it, we are part of it. And this is really, when I say we have to change the way we see, this is what I'm talking about. The world is not a line. Biology is not a line. The environment is not a linear line. It's something more like this, and even this is just a crude representation. But it's very complex, and everything is connected to everything else. And this is a slide of my father that I got from him. This is where he talks about what's in a cell. We have trillions of cells in our body, tens of trillions of cells. Each cell you can't see. It can sit on a pinhead. But each cell is a universe unto itself. And this is the diagram that you might see in old textbooks where we learned about cells. But it's far, far more complex. We really have no idea of what's actually in a cell. All of the enzymes and all of we haven't even identified it. It's a universe unto itself. And all of these cells, tens of trillions of cells, communicate with each other simultaneously in real time. And they're always working together to try to create health, because that's hardwired into our biology. It's always seeking to create health if we give it what it needs. And so it's like a symphony. There's connection, but it's connection with a purpose to create health. But this, unfortunately, is how we see the human body, and we see it in a mechanical way. We look at that complexity and we see the tree in front of us, and we try to manipulate it so that we can achieve our own selfish ends, which again is the root of the pharmaceutical model. But this is really what health is all about. If we consume the diet that is the most natural to our system, and science is showing that to be true, you may not see that when you look, Google things and you read the newspapers and read, because there's so much confusion out there, and so much of that is caused by industry who are purposefully trying to promote conflicting ideas and cause confusion. But this is what the real valid science is showing, is that this is what's most natural to us. And if we just eat this kind of food, our bodies will achieve health without any other interventions. The only problem is it doesn't make a lot of money for folks. I mean, even if you're selling broccoli, you can make a living from that. You can make a pretty good living. But you're not going to make the billions of dollars that pharmaceutical companies make. Now, I think it's important when we talk about this idea to understand that this is an idea that's actually aligned with what I would define as mainstream values. I think one of the things that a big trend in our society today is that we all feel a loss of control. And I think it frustrates a lot of us, whether it's cultural trends, economic trends, trends with our politics. We just sort of feel things are spinning out of control. But at least in our own personal lives, we can regain control of what's most important to us, which is our health. And it all begins with a decision to take personal responsibility. And I know that in some circles, that's not a politically correct idea anymore. But there's power in personal responsibility. And that's how we can take control of our health. And you know what we gain at the end of the day is we gain freedom. Because when you're free of disease, that's an incredibly empowering idea. When you don't have to rely on government or industry for your health, that's a very empowering idea. And there's more. There's an opportunity to help others around you, if you're faith-based, to live in alignment with your faith principles, to conserve our environment, as I've said. And also, if there's another pandemic that comes along, you hear a lot of talk about the bird flu, there's nothing better that you can do than to start eating right. One last point is a lot of people think that a plant-based diet's eating a salad. It's not. So I grew up on meatloaf, and I really did love my mom's meatloaf recipe. But I'd never go back, because this is just from a selfish standpoint, this is so much more pleasurable. It's not just eating salad and a broccoli. You can have all of this food, and it's plant-based, it's delicious. That looks like it's a creamy dairy dressing, but it's not. It's really delicious. And so right now, we are working on a strategy. As I said, I started this journey out to try to help my dad get this to more people. And so we have a program. Maybe I won't go into all of this here, but if any of you are interested, I'll be sticking around at the end, and we can talk about this. But we have a very exciting strategy to bring this immersion program to people all across the country in a way that's ubiquitous, that anyone, anywhere can do. And we want people to go through it. They can go through it individually, but we also want people to go through it in groups. We're very interested in taking this concept into the employer sector. I think there's a powerful opportunity. If any of you are employers and you have a business and you would like to talk to me about how you can introduce this concept to your employees, let me know. We're actually looking for a partner right now where we can do this and film it and maybe produce another documentary. I don't know if it'd be a feature documentary or a mini documentary, but to capture it on film so that other employers can understand this, because now you're using money to fight money. Employers can save a tremendous amount of money by getting their employees healthy. We're also going to be engaging in a lot more media production. The one thing I'll mention here is we have a feature film on my dad's life, based on a script written by Oscar-winning writer David S. Ward. In fact, Alicia Silverstone right now is reading the script. We're trying to recruit her to play my mom. So this won't be a documentary, it'll be a film with actors. This is my last slide here, I guess. I just like to say this is something I've always told my kids. I do feel like in many ways we live in a a time where it feels increasingly dark because, we have a lot of problems, economics, political, environmental. And I always remember as a kid, my dad would take me into this cave system in Virginia, and you get down in there, it's just pitch black. But then when we turned the light on, I never saw a light that bright. Go into pitch blackness, turn the light on, and it's so bright. And I'm an optimist, actually, because I think that as things get difficult, it's going to open up the opportunity for transformative ideas like the one that I've shared with you here today. So I actually do think the future is bright. I think we just need to change how we see things, and we need to start focusing on bottom-up solutions instead of always looking to our government to bail us out. So, like I said, Kim and I will be here afterwards, and if you want to come up and talk, share your ideas, your input. We also are still raising capital for Plant Pure. If you're an employer, you want to talk about that project, I'd love to talk to you. If you want to talk about that research project I mentioned, we can talk to you. And I have some information I can give to folks who are interested. My email address, by the way, is ncampbell@plantpurenation.com. ncampbell, like the Campbell Soup Company, at plantpurenation.com. So that's it. Thank you.
So when you took these people away and you put them onto the exclusive plant-based diets, did they end up having any other negative effects apart from the ones which are insulin caused them? Like, you're changing someone's diet very, very aggressively here, and I'll be amazed if there's no other results from that kind of change.
Yeah, so the only other thing that you have to be careful of is if you're on blood pressure medication, because your blood pressure also starts to normalize really quickly. So people who are on blood pressure meds, but especially diabetic medication, need to be monitored because they heal so fast. Those medicines actually can start to have some real toxic side effects if they're not adjusted. So I'd love to do a commercial one day where, the drug commercials, they always talk about the side effects, this can increase your risk of death and this, that. And to do a commercial for this, and the side effect is rapid healing, your medications could become toxic.
So there's basically two frames of thought in the marketplace, in the nutritional and the gut health living of that. One is the meat-based process of people just eating animal-based food versus the plant-based. Doesn't it all just boil down to what is your gut health?
Your gut health is entirely a consequence of what you eat. So this is a pretty well-established fact, and that's actually why probiotics, you see these probiotic products, they're kind of silly, they're meaningless, because first of all, most of them get destroyed in the digestive tract. But if you eat a healthy diet, your intestinal tract will automatically populate with all of those beneficial bacteria that you would consider to be part of a healthy gut. So what you have down there, it really depends on what you're eating. Because those bacteria, they're living off of those nutrients that are the food that's coming by. And if you have the right nutrients, you have the right nutrition, you're going to feed the right bacteria. So it's all connected. All right, thank you. Yep.
It's funny, a little earlier I was saying, well, who left me a recipe for sweet potato pie in my place over here? Now I get it. Sounds really good, too. So thank you for that. I just want to, before I set you on your way, I want to thank everybody and thank Andy for handling the microphone and staff and AV guys, and especially all of you for being here and being so attentive and kind. And I did besmirch Laura Hogel's reputation. She is here. She stayed here. She was in the restroom, I think. So back in quickly, our sponsors, Robert Allen Law, Alley Moss, Rogers and Lindsay, Risk Strategies, Yacht World, Sail Plan, DocMate, and AMI. And with that, I want to say thanks again. The bar is open. Thank you.